My name is Kylie Sanders. I'm 29, and in my family, I'm the reliable one, the one who pays on time and stays out of drama. No one expected I'd be the person who froze every account my sister touched. She talked me into opening a joint savings account for emergencies. It was supposed to be our safety net if rent spiked, if a medical bill hit, if life went sideways. I picked up extra hours and watched the balance inch up week after week. She sent money sometimes, when it suited her. She also never stopped talking about how she and her boyfriend were meant to see Europe. One lunch break, I logged in to move a little cash, and the balance nearly knocked me out of my chair. It wasn't low. It was gutted. Almost everything I'd saved was gone, emptied in a single transfer out of our emergency fund. My name sat there on the screen next to a number that might as well have been 0. I didn't call her to ask what happened. I didn't send a single text. After work, I walked into my credit union, asked for printed statements, filed a report, and had every shared account with my name on it frozen while the investigation started. 3 days later, as I was finishing a shift in my office in Albuquerque, my phone lit up with an overseas number. My sister was in Paris, out of cash and screaming, because every card she tried kept getting declined. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The office emptied out that evening while I sat at my desk staring at my phone, the missed call notification still glowing on the screen. Minutes earlier, I had listened to my sister's voice crackle through a weak international connection, high and frantic over noises from a city I had only seen in pictures. She had not asked what happened. She had gone straight to accusing, insisting that the chaos with her payments had to be my fault, that I had ruined everything by touching the account. Her boyfriend's voice bled through in the background, sharp and impatient. I kept my answers short and flat, and when the call finally dropped, I realized my hands were shaking hard enough to rattle the pen on my desk. I did not call her back. I locked my phone, slid it into my bag, and focused on the only thing I could control. The account was frozen, the report filed. The next step was making sure the story on paper matched what really happened, not the version my sister would try to sell once she calmed down enough to start dialing everyone else. On the way home, I stopped at the credit union again. I asked to speak with someone from the back office, and a man in a navy shirt came out with a clipboard. We sat at a side desk while he walked me through what the dispute would look like, how long an investigation might take, and what documents could help. He explained that the freeze meant neither of us could pull another dollar from that account until things were resolved, and that the bank would compare the withdrawals to my usual transactions and to the pattern of deposits under each name. Hearing it laid out in steps made the whole thing feel less like a screaming match waiting to happen, and more like a process that would move forward whether my family approved or not. Back at my apartment, I spread the printed statements across the kitchen table. Each line on the paper was a snapshot of the last year: deposits on payday, small transfers when I moved money to cover bills, and then, clustered near the top of the last page, a series of withdrawals marching out of the account in quick succession. Most of the deposits were under my name. A few were under hers. The large withdrawal that emptied us sat there in black ink with her name next to it, dated just before the trip. Seeing it on paper shifted something inside me from hurt to a cold, steady kind of anger. There was no way to twist that into an accident. I snapped photos of the statements and stored them in a locked folder on my laptop. Then I pulled out a notebook and started building a timeline from memory. When we opened the account, when we each contributed, the first time she mentioned Europe as a someday plan that somehow jumped forward to now. Carmen called while I was halfway through the list. She has worked in banking long enough to know how messy this can get when family is involved. I told her what I had done so far, sticking to the facts. She listened, then told me to save screenshots of everything that touched the account or the story around it, not just the transactions. Her advice was simple: treat this like a dispute with a stranger. No emotional negotiations in the group chat. Let the institution see the numbers, and keep my own records detailed enough that I would not have to argue from memory later. After we hung up, I opened my messages and scrolled through, capturing anything that mentioned the account, the savings, or the trip. Most of the texts were casual and vague, but a few stood out. Screenshots piled up in a folder next to the photos of the statements. By the time I finished, the sky outside my window had gone dark. My phone buzzed again with another overseas notification, then another, then a string of messages I did not open. I knew who it was. I turned the phone face down on the counter and left it there while I washed a single mug and wiped crumbs from the table around the stacks of paper. The apartment felt uncomfortably quiet without the usual background noise, but I did not reach for the remote. I wanted to hear my own thoughts clearly without anyone else's voice pushing in. When I finally went to bed, the folder on my laptop was full, the account was locked, and the next move was no longer mine. All I could do was wait to see how far my sister would be willing to go to get that money back, and who she would try to drag into the fight with her. By the next morning, my phone felt like a live wire on the nightstand. Notifications had stacked up while I slept. Missed calls, voicemails, a cluster of new messages in the family thread that usually only lit up for birthdays. For a minute, I watched the screen without touching it, the way you watch a pot you already know is boiling over. When I finally unlocked it, her name filled the recent calls list in a solid column. Underneath were messages from my mother, my father, and a few relatives who did not normally text me at all. I did not start with my sister. I opened the one from my mother first because I already knew what tone it would carry. She had sent a wall of words in the middle of the night, describing my sister as stranded in a foreign country, exhausted and scared while her cards kept failing. The part about the account came later, slipped into the middle like a side note. If I had done anything that caused this, I needed to fix it now. She ended by saying this was not what family did to each other. I read it and set the phone down again. There was no question in the message about whether money had been taken without my consent. No curiosity about how the balance had disappeared. The story had already been framed around my reaction, not her choices. I checked the family thread next. Messages from aunts and cousins stacked one after another, all versions of the same idea. They were sorry to hear my sister was stuck. They had heard there had been some confusion about the savings. They hoped I would not let stubbornness get in the way of helping her get home. None of them asked what actually happened or mentioned the work it had taken to build that balance. My father's voicemail came in just after sunrise. I listened to it while I poured coffee. His voice was calm in that careful way he uses when he wants something without sounding like he is asking for it. He said he understood I was upset and that boundaries mattered, then said my sister needed a way to get home and that everything else could be sorted out later if I would be reasonable for now. I finished my coffee before I answered anyone. Instead of typing back, I opened the app for my credit union and checked the account. The frozen notice sat at the top of the screen, the dispute case number just below it. The balance was unchanged. Seeing it, there was a reminder that this was not a private argument anymore. It was a file moving through a system that did not care who in my family shouted the loudest. Only then did I send a single message to my mother. I told her the account was under investigation, that I had not emptied it, and that I was not going to undo anything while the bank reviewed the withdrawals. I kept it short on purpose. No explanation she could slice apart and repeat. No apologies she could fold into a story about me backing down. Her reply arrived almost immediately. She said she could not believe I was choosing money over my own sister, that she had raised us to look out for each other, that everyone else in the family was doing what they could to help, and I was the only one digging in my heels. I did not respond. I slid the phone into my bag and left for work. The day blurred into a series of tasks that barely needed my attention. I answered emails, filed reports, moved from one obligation to the next while my mind replayed the messages. At lunch, I stepped outside to sit in my car with the air conditioning running and open social media out of habit, looking for anything that might pull my thoughts somewhere else. That was where I saw it. My sister had posted a long paragraph with a photo of herself in a crowded European street, backpack on, eyes turned up like she was trying to stay hopeful. The caption talked about being stuck far from home with no access to the savings she thought she could count on, and said that sometimes the people you trust most hurt you the worst. She never used my name, but she did not have to. Anyone who knew us could connect the dots. Comments were already piling up under the post. Friends, co-workers of hers I had never met. Even a few family members had left lines about staying strong, about how unfair money could make people, about hoping someone back home would step up and do the right thing. I let the screen go dark and sat there with the phone in my lap. The investigation at the bank was only beginning. Outside that app, the verdict over who was right and who was heartless had already started without me. That afternoon, I muted every app on my phone and tried to work, but the quiet did not last. During a break, I glanced down and saw the family thread jump to the top of the screen, new messages stacking so fast the preview banner could not keep up. Whatever my sister had written publicly, she was working the private channels just as hard. The next wave came from relatives who never contacted me unless someone got married or died. Short notes arrived one by one, dressed up as concern. They were sorry things had blown up. They hoped my sister was safe. They knew I was a good person, and could not imagine I would leave her without help on purpose. None of them asked whether I had a reason not to send money. The assumption under every line was that I was the one holding a switch I refused to flip. I did not answer. Every time I started to type, I pictured a screenshot of my message dropped into some other chat, trimmed to fit whatever version of the story my sister needed. So I let the thread fill up without me and kept my phone face down on the desk. The only record I kept was a tally in my head of how quickly people could pick a villain without ever seeing the numbers. By early evening, my mother called. I let it ring out twice before picking up, not to punish her, but because I already knew the script. Her voice had the clipped edge it got when bills were late or chores were forgotten. She said my sister sounded exhausted on the phone, that she had been in tears trying to explain why every card failed when she tried to pay. The way my mother framed it, the banking system was cruel and my reaction was petty. She asked what exactly I had done. I told her, calmly, that I had filed a dispute with the credit union and the account was locked until they finished reviewing the withdrawals. I said it once and left it there. She wanted more. An admission that I had gone too far? A promise I would fix it in the morning. I refused to decorate the truth with anything that could be twisted later. When she realized I was not going to bend in that call, she shifted tactics. She talked about how hard it was to sleep knowing her oldest child was halfway around the world without a safety net, how generous the extended family had been in trying to chip in. The unspoken part was that I was the only one choosing not to reach for my wallet. My father called later, long after dinner. His approach was quieter. He said he understood why I was upset, that the savings represented my work more than anyone else's, but that practical reality did not care about fairness. Plane tickets cost what they cost. Rooms had to be paid for. If my sister missed her flight home and landed in deeper trouble, he implied, we would all have to live with knowing I could have prevented it. Listening to him lay it out that way showed me how far they believed my responsibility stretched. In their eyes, it did not stop at my own balance or at honoring the purpose of the fund. It reached all the way across the ocean to cover every choice my sister made with money I had earned. I went to bed that night feeling like I was the one on trial, even though the only case number in this mess sat in the credit union system with my name next to claimant. The next day, my mother asked me to come over after work so we could talk face to face like adults. The phrasing was familiar, the same line she used when she wanted a hard conversation to end with everyone pretending they agreed. I almost said no. Instead, I told her I would stop by for a short visit and left it at that. Their house in Albuquerque looked the same when I pulled into the driveway. Trimmed yard, porch light on, curtains half drawn. From the street, nothing hinted at the version of me being dissected inside. In the kitchen, my father sat at the table with a legal pad, my mother across from him with her hands folded. There were no dinner plates, no coffee mugs, just a manila folder between them. My mother gestured to the chair opposite the folder. My father said they had talked about everything and come up with a plan that would remove the tension going forward. Only then did my mother slide the folder toward me, the flap already open to reveal a stack of forms with my name printed at the top of the first page. That night, the pages I had been handed felt heavier than the folder that held them. I spread the forms across my kitchen table and read every line. Most of the language was bland and careful, full of phrases about reducing conflict and simplifying access. The meaning was not subtle. If I signed, my name would stay on the account, but control over the money would move to my parents. Any disputes would go through them. Any withdrawals, too. Near the bottom, a paragraph bothered me most. A section where I would acknowledge that I was giving up the right to contest prior transactions. It read like a pre-written apology, like I would be admitting I had overreacted by involving the bank at all. I left the pages where they were and stepped back. What helped was remembering something Carmen had said on our last call. Treat this like you would if the other person were a stranger. If a stranger had emptied a joint account and then asked me to sign away any right to question it, I would not call that compromise. I would call it surrender. With that in mind, I opened my laptop and logged into the credit union again. The frozen account sat at the top of the dashboard with the case number attached. Underneath it, the rest of my finances looked exposed. My checking account, my small personal savings, the debit card I used for groceries and gas, everything still flowed through the same institution that was sorting out this mess. I opened a new tab and searched for another local bank in Albuquerque, one with branches near my apartment and my office. Within minutes, I had started an application for a new checking account in my name only, followed by a separate savings account for the emergency fund I should have built alone from the start. It felt disloyal to move even a fraction of my routines away from the credit union my parents loved, but the feeling passed. As soon as the new accounts were approved, I set up transfers so part of every paycheck would land there automatically and updated the direct deposit information at work. Then I went back to the old dashboard and made a list of every bill, subscription, and automatic payment still tied to that institution. One by one, I redirected them. The process was dull, but each confirmation email felt like one more strand cut in a net I had not realized I was wrapped in. When I finished, the only account that truly connected me to my sister anymore was the frozen one under investigation. The next afternoon, an email from the fraud department arrived. The subject line was formal, but the meaning was clear. They had finished their initial review and found irregularities in the withdrawals that did not match my established patterns. The case would stay open while they gathered more information, and the freeze would remain in place. For once, it was written down in neutral language, not reduced to family drama. I forwarded the email to Carmen. She called a few minutes later, sounding relieved. In her world, this was the predictable result of what we had documented. In mine, it felt like someone had finally said out loud that I was not imagining things. She suggested I organize everything I had collected into a single package. The statements, screenshots of text messages referencing the account, the timeline of deposits and withdrawals, even the public post my sister had written about being cut off. Numbers mattered most, but patterns of intent could help, especially if the bank needed to decide whether to treat the withdrawals as carelessness or something closer to deliberate misuse. So that evening, I sat down again at the kitchen table with a clear task. I labeled each document with dates and short notes. I put the statements in order, then added printouts of the messages and the post, each page numbered to match an entry on the timeline. It was the unglamorous part of standing my ground, and it kept my hands busy. My phone buzzed a few times while I worked. I ignored it until the last page slid into the folder and the binder clip snapped shut around the stack. When I finally checked the screen, there was a new message from my mother at the top of the list. She wrote that everyone would be at the house on Sunday evening, that it was time for us to sit down as a family and get past this. The words sounded conciliatory on the surface, but I had sat in that living room enough times to know what those meetings really were. They were less about understanding and more about pushing whoever caused the discomfort back into line. This time, I thought as I looked over at the folder on the table, I would not be walking in empty-handed. Sunday evening came with a stillness that felt rehearsed. I parked a few houses down, killed the engine, and rested my hand on the folder beside me. Once I walked in with it, there would be no pretending this was a misunderstanding. My mother opened the door as soon as I stepped onto the porch. Her smile was tight and formal. She glanced at the folder, then moved aside. The living room was already arranged, my father in his armchair, an aunt at the end of the couch, a cousin in the doorway to the kitchen. The only empty seat faced the television. My sister's face filled the screen in a video call, framed by a generic rental behind her. City noise seeped through the audio. Tristan hovered somewhere off camera. His low commentary bled in whenever he forgot to mute. Someone had propped the phone, so she looked straight down the room at me. No one asked how I was. My father cleared his throat and said they wanted to clear the air, as if the air had gotten cloudy on its own. My sister started talking before he finished. She described the week in Europe like a string of disasters: card failures at hotel desks, awkward standoffs with clerks, the humiliation of having payments rejected. Buried in the middle was the account, framed as something she thought she could rely on until I locked her out without warning. I watched the others instead of the screen. My aunt's jaw set. My cousin studied the floor. They had already heard this version. Now they were watching to see if I would fold into it. When she stopped, my mother turned to me and said this was my chance to explain myself, the same line she used when we tracked mud into the house as kids. The emphasis sat squarely on my reaction, not on the withdrawal that had gutted the savings. I did not match their script. I opened the folder and set the first statements on the coffee table, sliding them to the center. I pointed to the steady deposits under my name, the sporadic ones under hers, and the string of withdrawals leading right up to the date of her flight. I outlined what happened next: a visit to the credit union, a request for documentation, a dispute filed after confirming that almost the entire balance had moved without a single discussion. I mentioned the email from the fraud department only long enough to say the activity had already been flagged as irregular and that the freeze would stay until the review was finished. For a long moment, no one moved. Then my cousin stepped forward, picked up the top page and scanned the columns. His eyebrows lifted, but he stayed quiet. The numbers were speaking without help. On the screen, my sister demanded to know why I had not just come to her. I kept my eyes on the table. I said the account was for shared emergencies, not vacations, and that taking nearly all of it without warning was not something a quick talk could fix after the fact. Tristan's voice cut in again, dismissive and bored. I let it pass. For the first time since this started, I was not trying to win anyone over. I was documenting what had actually happened in front of the people most invested in pretending it had not. My father eventually asked what it would take for me to move past this. He sounded like someone brokering a deal. The way he framed it, my refusal to smooth things over was the problem now, not my sister's sense of entitlement. I told him I had already taken the only steps I trusted. The case was in the bank's hands. My own accounts were moving to a different institution. I was not signing anything that gave up my right to challenge what had been done with my name on it. My mother tried once more. She asked whether I really wanted this to be what people remembered about us, as if my refusal to be quiet would stain the family more than emptying a shared safety net for a trip. In that moment, it was obvious their priority was not fairness, it was silence. I slid the statements back into the folder, closed it, and stood. No one reached out. As I walked toward the door, their disapproval gathered behind me like heat, but it did not slow me. I had come when they asked, listened to what they wanted to say, and refused to step into the role they had written. Outside, the streetlights hummed over the quiet block in Albuquerque. The air was heavy and warm, but for the first time in weeks, it did not feel like something pushing me back inside. A few weeks later, life looked almost ordinary from the outside. My paycheck landed in a checking account with only my name on it. A small transfer slid into a new emergency fund after every payday. Bills, subscriptions, and random apps all pulled from cards tied to that account, not to anything with my sister attached. The numbers on the screen were modest, but they finally felt like they belonged to me alone. My family went quiet. There were no long calls, no surprise visits, just short, neutral messages now and then about weather or work. The silence did not feel like peace. It felt like waiting. Everyone knew the credit union was still reviewing the joint account. No one said it directly, but I could feel them hoping the bank would clear things up so they would not have to. The email from the fraud department landed in my inbox on an ordinary afternoon. I recognized the case number in the subject line before I even opened it. Inside, the language was dry. The credit union had finished its investigation. The withdrawal that wiped out our savings, and the pattern of transfers around it, did not match my documented use, and did not have proper consent from both account holders. Because of that, funds equal to the disputed amount would be credited back to me. I read those lines again and again. There was nothing about who cried harder, who told the better story, who made the bigger scene at family gatherings. It was just signatures, dates, policy. For weeks, I had been treated like I was cold and extreme. Here was a stranger at a desk, looking only at the trail of numbers, quietly agreeing that I had drawn a reasonable line. Later that day, my mother sent a long message. According to her, the credit union had humiliated the family. My sister was devastated. My decision had damaged my parents' relationship with people they had trusted for years. Every sentence circled embarrassment and inconvenience. None of them touched the simple fact that our shared safety net had been emptied for a European vacation. I did not answer. I forwarded the decision email to Carmen instead. She wrote back that consequences always sound cruel to people who never expected to meet them. That sentence sat with me longer than anything my family had said for months. News about my sister and Tristan reached me in fragments. A mutual friend mentioned they were scrambling to catch up on rent. Someone else let slip that the trip had cost more than they bragged about online, and that one of their cards was close to its limit. A post from a distant acquaintance joked about awkward group chats where people who had donated to their emergency wanted to know why the bank had sided with the cold sibling. I did not feel triumphant. Mostly, I felt tired. The credit union did not press charges, but they did tighten things on the account my parents shared with my sister. Transactions that used to clear instantly started flagging for review. Larger transfers took extra time and extra verification. My parents grumbled about the hassle and blamed the process, not the decision that made a process necessary in the first place. Invitations from home kept arriving. Sunday dinners, a cousin's birthday, early talk about the holidays. On the surface, the messages were warm. They said they missed me, said it would be good to have everyone in the same room. Underneath, I could feel the same expectation as always. I would show up, smooth everything over, and let the new family story become that this had simply gone too far, but was finally behind us. Each time I stopped and pictured that living room, I pictured sitting on the same couch, hearing the same lines, watching everyone work hard to pretend the real problem had been my reaction, not my sister's choice. I weighed the cost of going against the quiet I had found by staying away. Every time, I chose not to go. Instead, I let my life open in smaller, steadier ways. I joined coworkers for hikes in the foothills outside Albuquerque instead of inventing excuses in case my family needed me. I went to trivia nights at a bar I had driven past 100 times. I bought a couch that did not sag and a lamp I actually liked. I took a short solo trip, booked a cheap motel a few hours away, paid for gas and diner coffee with the new card, watched the charges clear, and realized that no one else's crisis reached into those numbers. On nights when sleep was slow to come, my mind sometimes replayed everything and asked the same question. Was there a version of this where I kept both the money and the picture of my family I had been carrying around for years? The honest answer was no. That picture only worked if I agreed that my paycheck, my credit, and my peace of mind existed to cushion my sister whenever she fell. Letting that picture go hurt. It felt like admitting that the story I grew up inside was never as simple as I wanted it to be. But once it cracked, I could finally see what I had been calling loyalty was often just fear. Fear of being the difficult one, the ungrateful daughter, the sister who would not fall in line. Walking away from that did not feel like winning. It felt like standing up after kneeling on hard tile for too long. Everything ached at first, but I was finally on my feet. If there is any value in how this played out, it is not that I proved a point or fixed my sister. People who rewrite their own stories will keep doing it. The value, for me, is the reminder that boundaries are not cruel just because someone else finds them inconvenient. You are allowed to stop making every bad decision around you easier to live with, even when the people making those decisions share your last name. My relationship with my family may never be soft or simple again. There are chairs at tables I used to feel obligated to fill that will stay empty. There are group threads I do not open. There is a sister who now knows I will not be her silent safety net, no matter how beautifully she frames the need. I do not know what you would have done in my place. Maybe you would have wired the money. Maybe you would have walked away sooner. All I can say is that my accounts and my connections finally line up with the truth instead of the version that kept everyone else comfortable. If you stayed with me through the whole story, thank you for listening. And if any part of it feels uncomfortably familiar, I hope it gives you permission to draw your own line, keep it steady, and choose a kind of peace that does not require you to disappear.